What happens when a simple interview question transforms into one of the most uncomfortable moments in late-night television history? Tonight, we're breaking down the moment Sophie Turner walked off The Tonight Show, leaving Jimmy Fallon speechless and the audience in stunned silence. Before we get into it, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think really happened here. The energy in Studio 6B felt different from the moment Sophie Turner walked onto the set. Jimmy Fallon greeted her with his usual enthusiasm. The band played, the audience applauded, but something in Sophie's expression suggested she wasn't quite in the mood for the typical late-night banter. She sat down, crossed her legs, and offered a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Jimmy launched into his standard opening, trying to break the ice with a joke about how cold New York had been lately. Sophie laughed, but it was brief, almost perfunctory. The first few questions were standard fare. How was she enjoying being back in the States? What was it like working on her latest project? Sophie answered each question with professional courtesy, but her responses were noticeably shorter than what audiences had come to expect from her previous appearances. Then Jimmy shifted gears. He leaned forward with that conspiratorial energy he's known for, and said, "So, I have to ask, because everyone's been talking about it online." Sophie's posture changed immediately. Her shoulders tensed slightly, and her smile faded just a fraction. Jimmy continued, seemingly oblivious to the shift in atmosphere. "There's been so much speculation about your personal life lately, and I know you've been pretty private about everything, but people are really curious about how you're handling all the attention." Sophie took a measured breath before responding. "I'm not really sure what you're referring to, Jimmy." Her tone was even, but there was an edge to it that made the audience shift uncomfortably in their seats. Jimmy, still maintaining his cheerful demeanor, pressed on. "Well, you know, all the headlines, the social media buzz. It seems like everywhere you go, people are analyzing every move you make. How do you deal with that kind of scrutiny?" "The same way anyone would," Sophie replied, her words coming out more clipped now. "I try not to read too much into what strangers on the internet think they know about my life." Jimmy nodded enthusiastically, as if he hadn't picked up on the warning signs. Right, but it must be tough when everyone has an opinion. Like, do you ever just want to set the record straight on some things?" Sophie's jaw tightened visibly. "Jimmy, I come on shows like this to talk about my work, not to address gossip and speculation about my private life." The audience had gone quiet now, sensing the tension building between the host and his guest. Jimmy, perhaps realizing he'd struck a nerve but unsure how to gracefully exit the topic, attempted to lighten the mood. Of course. I just think people are interested because they care. You know, your fans just want to make sure you're okay." "Are you my fan, Jimmy?" Sophie asked, and the question hung in the air like a challenge. Jimmy laughed nervously. "Well, yes, absolutely. I've loved your work since Game of Thrones." "Then maybe you could respect my boundaries the way a real fan would," Sophie said, and there was no mistaking the sharpness in her voice now. Jimmy's smile faltered for the first time. He glanced at his notes, clearly scrambling for a way to recover. "I didn't mean any disrespect, Sophie. I'm just asking questions that I think the audience wants to hear answered." "The audience," Sophie repeated, looking out at the crowd. "Right, because everything in my life should be public consumption for an audience." She turned back to Jimmy. "Do you get asked about every aspect of your personal life in interviews? Or is that privilege reserved for women in this industry?" Jimmy shifted in his seat, his discomfort now obvious. "I think that's a bit unfair. I ask all my guests about their lives. It's part of having a conversation." "There's a difference between having a conversation and fishing for sound bites," Sophie countered. "You're not asking me about my life, Jimmy. You're asking me to confirm or deny rumors so you can have a viral moment." The studio had gone completely silent, except for the occasional nervous cough from the audience. Jimmy's producers off camera were making subtle gestures, though it wasn't clear if they were signaling him to move on or to cut to commercial. "Look," Jimmy said, trying to inject some warmth back into his voice, "I really wasn't trying to make you uncomfortable. That's the last thing I want. I just thought we could have an honest conversation." "An honest conversation," Sophie repeated, her tone dripping with skepticism. "Jimmy, you didn't even ask me about the film I'm here to promote. You haven't mentioned the director, the cast, the story, nothing. You went straight for the personal stuff because that's what gets clicks and views. Don't dress it up as honesty." Jimmy ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that betrayed his growing frustration. "You're right, we should definitely talk about the film. That's why you're here." He picked up his note cards again. "So tell us about your character in No," Sophie interrupted. "I don't think I will." Jimmy blinked. "I'm sorry. I said no. I don't think I'm going to sit here and pretend like we can just skip past what you were doing and move on to a sanitized conversation about my movie." Sophie's voice remained level, but her words carried weight. "You wanted an honest conversation. Let's have one. Why do you think it's acceptable to ambush guests with questions about their personal lives under the guise of friendly chat?" Jimmy's face had gone red. "I wasn't ambushing you, Sophie. Come on, this is getting blown way out of proportion. is it? Sophie leaned forward now, matching his earlier posture. Because from where I'm sitting, you brought me on your show with the promise of promoting my work. And instead, you've spent the interview trying to get me to talk about my private life for ratings. That feels pretty calculated to me. I have producers. There's a whole team, Jimmy said, his voice rising slightly in defense. We discuss what topics might come up. It's not just me sitting here making things up. So your team told you to pry into my personal life, and you just went along with it? Sophie asked. That doesn't make it better, Jimmy. That makes it worse. Jimmy looked genuinely flustered now, his usual smooth talk show host persona cracking under pressure. You're twisting my words. I'm trying to do my job here, and I'm trying to do mine, Sophie shot back. But apparently, for women in this industry, our job includes being willing to offer up our private lives as entertainment. Well, I'm not interested in playing that game anymore. The tension had reached a breaking point. Jimmy looked to his producers again, and there was a brief moment where it seemed like someone might intervene. But before anyone could act, Jimmy made one more attempt to salvage the interview. Sophie, I hear you, I really do. But you have to understand, this is live television. We're having a conversation in front of millions of people. Sometimes these conversations go in unexpected directions. That's just the nature of the format. Sophie stood up. The movement was so sudden that Jimmy actually leaned back in his chair. The nature of the format, she said, is that you think you're entitled to any information you want because there are cameras rolling. But I don't owe you or anyone watching this my entire life story just because I'm an actress. Sophie, please sit down, Jimmy said, and for the first time, there was a note of genuine pleading in his voice. We can talk about the movie. We can talk about whatever you want. Now you want to talk about what I want, Sophie said with a bitter laugh. How generous of you, Jimmy. She unclipped her microphone and placed it carefully on the chair. I think I'm done here. Jimmy stood up quickly, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Sophie, come on, let's just take a breath here. We can reset, we can start over. Sophie turned to face him, and the look in her eyes was one of complete exhaustion mixed with defiance. Reset, Jimmy, you can't just reset a conversation when you don't like where it's going. This isn't a video game. These are real boundaries that you crossed, and you don't get to just hit restart and pretend it didn't happen. The audience was completely still, now, caught between wanting to look away from the uncomfortable scene and being unable to tear their eyes from it. Some people had their phones out, undoubtedly recording every second of the unfolding drama. Jimmy's voice took on a more desperate quality. You're absolutely right. I crossed a line, and I apologize. But walking off the show, that's not going to solve anything. It's just going to create more headlines, more speculation. So I should stay and finish this interview to avoid creating headlines. Sophie asked, incredulous. Do you hear yourself right now? You're literally telling me that my comfort, my boundaries, matter less than avoiding negative publicity for your show. That's not what I'm saying, Jimmy protested, but his words lacked conviction. Then what are you saying? Sophie challenged, because it sounds like you're more concerned about how this looks than about the fact that you made your guest uncomfortable on national television. Jimmy looked around helplessly, as if hoping someone would jump in and save him from this moment, but his producers remained silent. The band was frozen, and the audience just stared. He was on his own. I'm saying that we're both professionals. We can work through this. We've had disagreements, okay, but we can move past it. A disagreement, Sophie repeated slowly, is when two people have different opinions about something. What happened here wasn't a disagreement. Jimmy, you tried to exploit my personal life for content, and when I called you out on it, you got defensive. That's not a disagreement. That's a problem with how you conduct interviews. Jimmy's face flushed deeper. That's a pretty harsh accusation. I've been doing this show for years. I've interviewed hundreds of people. Nobody's ever had a problem like this before. Really? Sophie's eyebrow arched. Nobody? Or have you just been lucky enough that most people were too polite or too afraid of backlash to call you out on it? She took a step closer to him. Just because someone doesn't verbally object doesn't mean they were comfortable with your questions. Jimmy, it just means they smiled through their discomfort because that's what we're trained to do in this industry. The accusation landed hard. Jimmy opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. For a moment, he seemed genuinely lost for words. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. I never thought about it that way. Maybe you should have, Sophie said, not unkindly, but firmly. Maybe before you ask invasive questions, you should think about whether you'd want someone asking you the same things in front of millions of people. Jimmy nodded slowly, but then seemed to remember where he was and what was happening. But Sophie, even if I messed up, and I'm admitting that maybe I did, walking off is a big deal. It's going to follow you. People are going to talk about this. Let them talk, Sophie said with a shrug. I'd rather have people talking about me standing up for myself than have them watching me sit here and take disrespect with a smile. At least one of those things I can live with. But your movie, Jimmy tried again, grasping at straws. Don't you want to promote your film? That's why you came here. Sophie laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're really going to use my movie as leverage right now. after you spent the entire interview ignoring it. That's rich. Jimmy, really rich. I'm not trying to leverage anything, Jimmy said, frustration creeping back into his tone. I'm trying to understand why you're willing to throw away this opportunity over a few questions that you didn't like. A few questions I didn't like, Sophie echoed, shaking her head. You're still minimizing what you did. Those weren't just questions I didn't like, Jimmy. They were invasive, they were inappropriate, and they had nothing to do with why I agreed to come on this show. And the fact that you still don't seem to get that is exactly why I need to leave. A voice from off camera, presumably one of the producers, called out, "We need to go to commercial." Jimmy ignored them. "Sophie, please, just give me 5 minutes. We'll go to break, we'll talk, and we can figure this out." "There's nothing to figure out," Sophie said firmly. "I made my boundary clear. You pushed past it. I'm removing myself from the situation. That's it. That's the whole story." "But you're making me look terrible," Jimmy blurted out, and immediately seemed to regret it. Sophie stared at him for a long moment. "I'm making you look terrible. Jimmy, I didn't make you ask those questions. I didn't make you ignore my discomfort. I didn't make you defensive when I called you out. You did all of that yourself. If you look terrible right now, that's on you, not me." The words hit like a slap. Jimmy's expression shifted through several emotions: anger, embarrassment, resignation. "Fine," he said finally. "If that's how you feel, then I guess there's nothing I can say to change your mind." "There isn't," Sophie confirmed. "Then I hope you realize what you're doing," Jimmy said, and there was an edge to his voice now that hadn't been there before. "This industry has a long memory. People don't forget things like this." Sophie's eyes narrowed. "Is that a threat, Jimmy?" "It's not a threat," he said quickly. It's reality. You walk off one of the biggest talk shows on television. People are going to remember that." "Good," Sophie said, without hesitation. "I hope they do remember. I hope every woman who watches this remembers that they don't have to sit through invasive questions just because someone has a camera pointed at them. I hope every interviewer who sees this thinks twice before they try to pry into someone's personal life without permission. And I hope you remember this the next time you have a guest on your show." Jimmy was quiet for a moment, clearly wrestling with how to respond. The producer's voice came again, more insistent this time. "Jimmy, we really need to go to commercial now." "Give me a second," Jimmy snapped, then seemed to catch himself. He turned back to Sophie, and some of the fight had gone out of his voice. "Look, I'm sorry. I really am. I didn't mean to make you feel disrespected or uncomfortable. That was never my intention." "Your intention doesn't erase the impact," Sophie said. "And honestly, Jimmy, I don't think you're sorry about what you did. I think you're sorry about how it turned out. There's a difference." "That's not fair," Jimmy protested weakly. "Neither was this interview," Sophie countered. She picked up her phone from the side table where she'd placed it earlier. "I'm going to leave now. You can do whatever you want with the rest of your showtime. Run a clip package. Bring out your next guest early. Tell jokes about how difficult I am. Whatever helps you sleep at night." "I wouldn't do that," Jimmy said, sounding almost offended. "Wouldn't you?" Sophie asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. "Because right now, you have a choice. You can use this as a moment of reflection, or you can turn me into the villain of this story. Based on how this conversation has gone, I'm not confident which one you'll choose." Jimmy opened his mouth to respond, but Sophie held up a hand to stop him. "Actually, don't answer that. I don't want to know. I'd rather just leave with the tiny bit of respect I still have for you, intact." She turned and started walking toward the exit. The cameras followed her movement, unsure whether they should still be rolling. The audience sat in shocked silence, watching the actress make her way off the stage. Jimmy called after her, one last desperate attempt. "Sophie, wait. We can do better. I can do better. Just give me one more chance." Sophie paused at the edge of the stage and looked back at him over her shoulder. For a brief moment, something like sympathy flashed across her face. "Jimmy, you've had multiple chances throughout this entire interview. Every time I expressed discomfort, every time I tried to redirect the conversation, that was a chance for you to course correct. You chose not to take any of them. I'm not going to give you another one at my own expense." "So that's it?" Jimmy asked, his voice small. "This is how it ends." "This is how it ends," Sophie confirmed. She gave him a slight nod, something that might have been acknowledgement or goodbye, or both. And then she walked through the curtain and disappeared from view. Jimmy stood alone on the stage. The lights still bright, the cameras still rolling, the audience still silent. He looked lost, like an actor who'd forgotten his lines and had no prompter to save him. The producer's voice cut through the silence one more time, sharp and commanding. "Commercial now." Jimmy seemed to snap back to reality. He turned to the camera, his famous smile nowhere in evidence, and said in a voice that shook slightly, "We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back." The commercial break music started, but it sounded hollow in the stunned atmosphere of the studio. As the cameras cut away, Jimmy sank back into his chair and put his head in his hands. The audience began to murmur among themselves, pulling out phones, whispering theories about what they'd just witnessed. In the studio, the commercial break felt like it lasted an eternity. Jimmy remained in his chair, trying to compose himself. Members of the audience were typing frantically on their phones. Whatever had just happened was already spreading across the internet at lightning speed. When the show came back, Jimmy stood at his desk with unusual seriousness. "Welcome back. As you can see, Sophie Turner has left the show. I want to address what just happened here." The audience was completely silent. "I asked questions tonight that made my guest uncomfortable. She expressed that discomfort, and instead of respecting her boundaries, I pushed forward. That was wrong." His voice wavered. "When she told me I crossed a line, I should have immediately apologized. Instead, I got defensive. I made it about me rather than her boundaries. What happened tonight? That's not on Sophie. That's on me. She set a boundary. I didn't respect it, and she did what she needed to do." He took a breath. Sophie was right about how women in this industry are treated differently. "I need to examine my own behavior. I don't know if she'll accept an apology from me, and she doesn't owe me that. What I do know is that I need to be better. This show needs to be better." The audience gave scattered applause. He nodded and moved to introduce his next guest. The show continued, but the energy had shifted. Jimmy's interactions with remaining guests were noticeably more cautious. When the show ended, he walked off quickly without his usual goodbye routine. Within hours, the incident was everywhere. Video clips flooded social media. Some defended Jimmy, others praised Sophie. The debate raged across every platform. What made this different was its raw, unscripted nature. Audiences had watched it unfold in real time without filters. For Jimmy, his admission earned some goodwill, but many questioned whether it was genuine. For Sophie, she gained enormous support but also faced criticism. The incident sparked conversations everywhere about boundaries and respect in interviews. The question that lingered was whether anything would actually change, or if this would become another forgotten piece of celebrity drama. The clips would live on the internet forever, a permanent record of when the facade cracked open. So, what do you think? Was Sophie right to walk off, or should she have stayed and finished the interview? Did Jimmy's apology go far enough, or was it too little too late? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into the moments that get everyone talking. We'll see you in the next one.